The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Tough weekend for the Toronto Maple Leafs, CJ. Back-to-back losses against Nashville and Dallas have a lot of people in the hockey world talking about what could be next for the Toronto Maple Leafs, particularly with their head coach, Craig Berube. A lot of speculation out there that his days could be numbered with the Toronto Maple Leafs. What are you hearing on that?
Well, I think at this point, the speculation really is just from people trying to put things together here. I mean, you go on a road trip, as you mentioned, there's also the game in Washington, Julian, before the weekend back-to-backs. They're outscored 14-4 in those three losses. You know, this is a team that's lost 5 of 6, that finds itself 15th in the Eastern Conference. I mean, and, you know, we're getting towards the midpoint of the season. So I think that's where the speculation has largely come from, you know, compared to sort of informed speculation, I would call it, because, you know, what I can tell you clearly is Leafs management doesn't want to make a coaching change. You know, Craig Berube is 18, 19 months into a 4-year deal with this team. And, you know, he's not that far removed if you take yourself out of the emotions of the present moment of, you know, coaching the Leafs to an Atlantic Division title last year, getting them to the second round and Game 7 against a team in the Florida Panthers that went on to win the thing. You know, I think that has earned him a certain amount of, I'm trying to find the right word. I was going to say patience, but I don't think really the attitude is patience right now. I mean, the Leafs are looking for answers. I mean, there's just no way around it. And, you know, it kind of complicates things, I think, that we're here in this Christmas week, you know, the holiday break coming up, just in terms of, you know, maybe a break could be good for the team, just a little bit of a reset, as it would be for any team. You know, but this is, the temperature is certainly up around the Leafs. I think they're trying to sort of weather the storm and find their way through this. You know, they've been pretty patient to this point with Berube, but, you know, I think it is fair to ask the question, how long can they hold on? I don't have the answer for you exactly this moment.
So I'm surprised at that. This is just me talking here, considering where this team is at in the standings, and the best players on this team don't look nearly the same as they've been in previous seasons. William Nylander says he's never experienced anything like this. Austin Matthews looks like a shell of himself. If it's not going to be Craig Berube, then what has to change with this team?
Well, I think those top players, you probably bet on them turning it around at some point. You know, the Leafs have been down their top 2 right shot defensemen, and Chris Tanev and Brandon Carlo, for an extended period of time. But there is at least a little bit of internal hope that they're both going to be in a position to return to the lineup in the relatively near future. You know, so I think you can try to find, you know, some reasons there to think that things could turn. I mean, Nylander's gone 11 games right now without a goal. That's likely not going to last, you know, based on a long period of history that he's been an NHL player. You know, Matthews, I think, is scoring at a 65-point pace, give or take. Probably not going to last as well. So, you know, I'm not sitting here advocating. I'm not picking a side no. Personally. I'm just saying those are the things I think that they're looking at. You know, and you know, I think part of this too is, you know, what the Leafs at the top levels of the organization are asking themselves is, every single time that things go a little bit wrong, do we have to make a big change? You know what I mean? Like, I think that, you know, some of this is, you know, they play obviously in a pretty loud market in terms of the attention they get, the number of fans they have, the number of reporters and podcasts and TV stations and everything that take interest in what they do. And so I think they're trying to kind of get through this without having to make those kind of moves. You know, I don't know if they're going to be successful. I don't know how much longer they can hold on. You know, they haven't really fallen too far, relatively speaking, in the playoff race, just because of how jumbled up the standings are. But I mean, let's face it, they've got very little margin for error if they are to extend their playoff run, and they haven't played good enough hockey. I mean, at the end of the day, where does all the noise come from, right? It's not just invented. It's a response to the fact they're 35 games into the season. They've got 11 regulation wins. You know, as I mentioned, they're coming off a road trip where they didn't win a game and were blown out in a couple of those games. And so, you know, I think that they're trying to sort of fight their way through this without triggering any sort of kind of panic button moves. And And, we'll see. It's sort of like two opposing forces going at one another. I'm not sure which one's going to come out on top over time here.
I don't know. Does this group even deserve the benefit of the doubt to figure this out? I just hearing other people talk about this on Monday, it seems like that prevailing theme is that this team is just going to have to figure this all out on their own. I don't know if that's the right option with this team. Like, you've just experienced all this losing and player and efforts with no heart. And again, you mentioned those statistics with William Nylander not having goals in how many games, and Austin Matthews playing at a 65-point pace. Like, something, and you could look back on different conversations we've had with the Leafs, and you could probably, hear some similar thinking in that. But like, something internally needs to change with this group. Like, it doesn't make sense that I'm just perplexed at the fact that they're in the spot that they're in right now. And the option right now, unless something changes, is just, well, we're just going to have to figure this out on our own. I don't think that's acceptable for this group. I don't think it's acceptable at all.
Well, look, they talked about being a championship team this year. Like, that was the expectation. I think everyone understood it was going to be tougher, that there was going to be new challenges. You say goodbye to a player like Mitch Marner, and that's going to come with an adjustment period. But I don't think anyone saw them being here. Like I'm getting a sense of, like, there's a level of being stunned, I think, across, permeating from all levels of this organization. Like, I think they're surprised where they're at. And that's left it a little harder to figure out exactly what you have to do. Let's call it as it is. And this would be true in a few cases around the league. The easiest thing to do is to change a coach. It's easier, generally speaking, than making a trade that carries more risk. And, the Leafs actually haven't changed coaches a lot with this core. They gave Sheldon Keefe 5 years of runway, prior to going to Craig Berube here. But Berube hasn't been here too long. And so I think they're wrestling kind of with all this stuff. I think the argument, at least what I've heard, that makes some sense, is that it might not, like, I agree with you. The problems here are not just coaching. Like, I don't think that would explain the entirety of the situation. But the next steps beyond the coaching change start to get really serious really quickly. And so I think you need to figure out, can we move forward with this core? Or are we actually potentially looking at, a full reset for this group? And one way I would argue you could do that is by bringing in a new coach. You get to see a second half of this season. Does the play improve? Can systems work maybe better accentuate, especially the top guys on the roster, to do what they've done a lot of times over their careers? Or is this maybe have they just topped out? Have they hit their ceiling? I don't know that you can figure that out fully without that coaching change, just because there is a possibility that a lot of this does come down to coaching. It's really hard for me to look through the results and say definitively it's one way or the other. But, it's probably the question right now in Toronto, because they thought they had a 3-year window left to chase a championship. Like, that's kind of been the operational thinking internally. And, all of a sudden that's completely in question. This season, obviously, right now, it does not look like a year they're going to challenge for a cup unless there's a dramatic turnaround. And then what are you left with? Are we talking about changing out some of the older pieces around the fringes? I feel like they've done that a lot, and they still haven't really pushed things further. And so, I can see the case that that some out there would just want to see a new voice behind the bench, just to see, like, can they get the power play going? Certain things I think you can point to with coaching. The Leafs are getting caved in every night. They're 30th right now in even strength shot attempts out of 32 teams. They've only outshot opponents 3 times in the last month. One of them happened to be Sunday's game against the Dallas Stars. But, they're on the wrong end of the game at even strength consistently, and by a wide margin most often. And their power play stinks. And it had been a pretty top power play for a lot of years. And so those, I think those are areas that you could see a coach make an adjustment or make changes that lead to better, process related results. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to more wins, but I think that there's part of you that wants to see that too. So, it's a really tricky time. It's not a great time from a human level to make these kind of changes, all those sorts of things. But it does feel like the urgency's up there, and really the sense I'm getting from the organization is they're just looking for solutions. Like, we've seen them move around the power play. Like, we actually have seen some changes in these last couple games. Results are not getting any better. They're coming home to play Pittsburgh on Tuesday afternoon. Usually kind of one of the fun games of the year. It's, an early start. It's obviously around the holidays. I imagine there'll be lots of kids in the building, but I'm fascinated to see what kind of atmosphere is around that game, just because, the team has really hit the skids here, and they seem to be out of answers.
If you're Toronto and you have that game against Pittsburgh tomorrow on Tuesday, as you said, and on the weekend you have the Ottawa Senators coming into your building, and if you don't get results in either of those games, if you think people are mad now, imagine what they'll be like if those two games do not go their way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair concern. They've lost 5 of 6, right? And this team also lost 5 in a row in November at one point. Around that stage, Brad Treliving came out to the media and defended, Craig Berube, and talked pretty openly about the team and, all sorts of, I think he was pretty honest at that point about how he'd seen them play. Couldn't fit the number of good games on one hand, kind of thing. The sad part is it's a month later. There might have been 1 or 2 more good games since then, but there have not really been very many. Even some of the nights they've won, it just has not been what you'd hope to see. So, yeah, it does feel like it's on the precipice. Now, I guess the optimist would tell you, get a big win against Pittsburgh, go into the break feeling good, come back. If you can beat Ottawa, it can get going the other way too, right? And people will get behind the team, I think, and get excited if the play improves, if the results improve. But, right now it's just hard to know why that would happen, right? Like, you haven't seen it enough. I mean, it's 11 regulation wins in 35 games for a team that started off the year talking about trying to compete for a championship. And so, they really are in a tough spot. They've dug a pretty big hole with the play. And, at least right now, I mean, look at, if you were looking to make a firing, Monday, today would have been a good day. Just from a purely, they're coming back off the road from Dallas. They're, from a logistical standpoint, it would have been an easy day to do it. And look, they didn't do it. So I think that tells you something. I really do believe management is trying to stand behind this coaching staff, is trying to be part of the solution and work out their way out of it. But you're right to ask, like, how much longer that patience can hold true. I don't really know. They clearly need to start winning games, though, or else the whole season's going to be lost. And then, we're talking about a lot more than just, a coaching change potentially.
How much is Toronto's willingness to stick with Craig Berube right now? How much of that has to do with his remaining contract, as you alluded to, and how much of that has to do with remaining options that are out there? Because some people would look at guys like a Pete DeBoer or even a John Tortorella, who has bounced around from different places to places. And even if his shelf life might be a bit short, he's going to try to help your team be better defensively and squeeze every little bit of talent you can get while maybe making a playoff run or two. Well, not a run to the playoffs, I should say. Like, how much is Berube being in Toronto? How much does that have to do with the options that could be available?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, to me, DeBoer would be the person to chase if you decided to make that change. Peter Laviolette's also out there. I mean, there are veteran coaches that have had a lot of success, as each of those 3 that we mentioned have. I think just DeBoer's track record of taking teams to the conference final is hard to ignore. And you need only look at his good friend, Paul Maurice, longtime friend, at an example of when Paul Maurice was hired by the Panthers. I don't think too many people thought, oh, wow, this is going to usher in this great period necessarily. And I say that with respect to Paul, but, he'd coached in the league a long time and, not won a Stanley Cup. And then all of a sudden he coaches a team to 3 straight years in that final and wins 2 of them. Might have been the right guy for the right roster. I certainly don't think the Leafs are set up as well as those Panthers were when they hired Maurice. But, I guess the point being is a coaching change can have that kind of effect. I mean, the Edmonton Oilers have changed coaches repeatedly during the Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl era. And it's only since they hired Chris Knobloch that they've really unlocked another level for themselves. And I think that's the other potential argument for the coaching change, even if it does feel early, even if Berube does have that time left, is that, there are examples where teams have been kind of lost and that sort of change helps them get back to where they are. And I think if you're looking, look, the Leafs roster has flaws in it. But I still think they're underperforming their talent level to this point in the season. And that ultimately usually falls back on a coach on some level. The players have to carry the burden. The players, I'm all down for anyone criticizing, Austin Matthews' performance this year. Like, I think it's fair game given what he's paid, given what he means to the team, and given where his level's been at, or Nylander, especially of late here, really going south. But, you're not trading those guys right now and expecting to win, whereas you might make a coaching change and expect to win. Like, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And so I would think DeBoer would be the main target if they got there, but I at this point have no reason to believe they've got that far. I mean, I'm sure every single day, it's like how GMs talk about trades that could happen. I'm sure internally they're discussing, the potential options they could go down, but no reason to believe that that's imminent or anything like that at this time.
Okay, here's my final Craig Berube question. How would you evaluate or assess his relationship with the best / skilled players on this team? And I have two players in mind in William Nylander and Austin Matthews. How would you assess their relationship?
Well, he's had a very open relationship and honest, forthright with Nylander in particular. I mean, really, since the first day Craig Berube took the job, it feels like you see them have routine conversations on the ice. They've exchanged some barbs here and there that don't seem to necessarily be mean-spirited, but seem to be kind of direct. I think that maybe more than the relationship, like the personal side of it, because I think, quite honestly, this isn't a case of like a team hating its coach. Like, I think most people have a ton of respect for Craig Berube, and he's a very straightforward guy to deal with. I don't think he plays mind games. Like I don't think this isn't an interpersonal issue, but what it might be is the system that he deploys, is it getting enough out of those guys? Does it put them in a position where they can succeed, where they're giving up possession, where they're, it's supposed to be a bit more of a chip and chase type of game? Does that accentuate what they do best? And I think the answer kind of speaks for itself in some of the results there. Again, the results also hurt. If the Leafs had an even capable power play, that these guys would have a lot more points because they're key figures on the power play. But I do think there could be a disconnect in terms of, getting the most out of those guys. But I think they've bought in, quite honestly. I mean, Austin Matthews leads the league among forwards in block shots this year. Now, some of that's because the Leafs don't have the puck. But I don't think you can say there's an effort issue per se. Like, it's not like he's not trying. I think he's trying to play defensively in the way that the coach wants, but it just might not be the right fit. It might not be the best way, if you have players like that on your roster, to maximize your roster. Right. And so that's probably the most pressing question. I don't see this as a coach that the players can't get along with or don't respect. I think it's a coach that wants to do it a certain way, and it might not be the way that's the best to get the most out of this group of talent that he has on his roster.
Okay, one last Leafs question as we round out Leafs Corner to start off the show. As best as you can, what do you think Brad Treliving and Keith Pelley are thinking with this group, with this roster, with this team right now? Like, I still can't believe that this team is in this situation.
Well, that's where they're at. The Leafs had pro scouting meetings last week, and you could just sense, I mean, there's a little bit of disbelief about where they're at. As I mentioned, I do think that they were prepared sort of mentally that this year would be a bit more of a struggle. They've not just made the playoffs 9 years in a row, but for the most part, they've made in those seasons pretty handily. Like, it hasn't been a question. They've been in playoff positioning certainly by this point on the calendar and kind of been locked in, and it's been relatively comfortable. So I think that they were ready for a little bit more of a battle this year, but I don't think they figured they'd find themselves this far behind the eight ball at this point in the season. I mean, even if they win the last game before the break against Pittsburgh, they're still going to be eighth in the Atlantic Division entering the Christmas break. I mean, that's unfamiliar territory for this organization for over a decade. And so, what are they thinking? I think a whole bunch of things. I think they're certainly out there looking at ways they might improve things. There's risk in that too. They've traded a lot of draft capital, right? Not just Brad Treliving, but even before him, they've been sort of all in as an organization for a lot of years. That doesn't leave you with many prospects. It doesn't leave you with much of a pipeline. And I think they have to be very careful about any deals they might make, just in terms of, this season might actually get to a point where it's beyond saving with any given trade or what have you. So, there's no way to dress this up. Like, they're in a really tough spot. They don't own their first round pick this year or next year. And they're supposed to be good at the end of the day. Like, they made decisions and moves and acquisitions and signed players in the last year or two with the idea that they would be, in the playoffs and competing for Stanley Cup. And they just have been nowhere near that standard any way you measure it now, by points in the standings, by underlying numbers such as shot attempts or possession time, by the way they defend. It's been about as bad as it could be, quite frankly, for a team with this level of talent. And so I think what they're thinking is, how can they just start to crawl out of it, one step at a time. I think they kind of are grinding on those answers and maybe not thinking of the big picture right now as much. But I'll tell you, they need a Christmas break, not because they need eggnog or some presents under the tree or family time, although all those things are great. But I think having a little bit of a break, a reset, a refresh, whatever you want to call it, probably is a positive thing, given the way that the season's kind of skidded away from them in November and December.
All right, let's move on from the Toronto Maple Leafs and talk about the hottest team in the National Hockey League, the Buffalo Sabres. Really? Yeah. They 6-game winning streak, 7 wins in their last 10, and that's a team that changed out their general manager last week. And AGM Jason Carmano's out. And then in Jarmo Kekalainen, Marc Bergevin, really, and Josh Flynn in the Sabres organization now. Before we get to their play on the ice, what have you made of their changes to the front office in their last couple of days?
Well, the Jarmo bump is real, and it's spectacular.
Yes. It is. Love it. Love that descriptor.
It's, it's fascinating to see it happen so quickly on the ice. Like, I don't know that you can connect or correlate that to anything that's happening in the front office, because obviously the moves that are being made now is about, positioning the organization to make better decisions moving forward than it has. And so, good timing, fortuitous timing. We heard Rasmus Dahlin talk about how excited he was for Jarmo Kekalainen coming in. I think he said something along the lines of he's going to be the guy to get this thing going on track. So, I see that as there's probably a little bit of hope back in that market where it wasn't there to begin with, and they're obviously investing in getting a little bit more of an experienced front office. I mean, Marc Bergevin, having been a GM himself, and was in LA for the last number of years, as the associate GM. Mm-hmm. Josh Flynn worked for the Columbus Blue Jackets for a long time, 17 years, I believe, most recently, handling their cap sheet and some of the legal matters, which is, I think, what he'll be doing in Buffalo. But really what they're doing is beefing up the front office. I think that you're going to see them beef up and revamp the scouting staff and, the process of setting up the organization the way you want it to work behind the scenes. I think that's going to take a little bit of time, but obviously Kekalainen came in with some ideas and he's moving quickly. As for on the ice, them winning these games only further underlines my belief that I've told you, Julian. I think that this is a team that, could be pretty active, with the new GM and this is kind of as we get close to the trade deadline and that, but we know how important it would be to end that playoff drought. I think just so that idiots like you and I stop talking about it, but also to restore some hope. I mean, I'm trying to remember, was it a 10-year drought that there was in Toronto? But I remember how big a deal it was 9 or 10 years when the Leafs just got in 2013. No one at that time thought they were going to win a Stanley Cup. In fact, they almost upset the Bruins that year. But even still, it almost just like, it makes you think, oh, wow, there'll be good days again. Because sometimes when you're around an organization that loses as much as the Sabres have lost, kind of just sucks all the energy out. So, it's been kind of interesting to see them surge at this moment. kind of like the Canucks have been surging since the Quinn Hughes trade, since their end of things with Marco Rossi and Zeke Buium. Liam Ogren scored a shootout goal for them there. But sometimes these moves, it's a little apples to oranges, but because we're talking about a GM change, we're talking about a big trade, and then potentially when we're talking about the Leafs, you're talking about maybe making a coaching change. But sometimes those sort of shocks to the system do produce at least a short-term kick, and I think that's what you're seeing in Buffalo.
Yeah, I'll give the Sabres this. As we're recording right now, they're only 3 points out of the top 3 in the Atlantic Division. If this run somehow continues, they get the Ottawa Senators on Tuesday. Those guys have won 4 in a row, by the way. So 2 teams actually playing pretty well in recent games, going head to head on Tuesday. We should mention, since it's the Sens too, having a healthy Josh Norris could be a game changer. I mean, he scored a nice goal the other night in the shootout, I think it was. But having him in the lineup, and if he can stay there, I'm knocking wood. I realize that injuries have been a huge sort of story in a negative way in Norris's career, but that does change the complexion if he's able to perform and be in your lineup too. So could be some good bounces there with the GM coming in right at the time that you get a guy back like that who's basically not been too available for them since they made the trade last year at the deadline. I can imagine Tuesday is going to be an emotional, interesting night for Josh Norris, because I don't know if people have realized this. He has not played a game against the Senators in Ottawa since he was traded in March. There have been other opportunities where both teams have played against each other, but Josh has yet to play a game against the Senators in Ottawa. So Tuesday is going to be a very interesting game and very emotional because he's still friends with all of those guys on that team. And I remember after the trade happened, Brady Tkachuk was crying in front of all of us. That's going to be a really fascinating game to watch before Christmas.
Right. And obviously the Sabres are going to want to keep their good roll going, much like the Senators. You get that last game before Christmas. It's sort of like you can see the mini finish line in sight, at least for a few days. So probably should be a competitive one too.
Yeah. Also, I say the Sabres as the hottest team in the NHL. Yes, I know Colorado, as we're recording, has won 8 of their last 10. If you want to go back and forth between streaks and that, you can complain in the comments about that. But Buffalo is playing really well these last couple of games.
Everything we say is the non-Colorado division, because if we just talked about the best or the hottest or whatever, it would just always be Colorado. So
exactly.
Are they at 2 regulation win losses still on the entire season?
I believe, yes. 2 regulation losses.
I know they've lost a bunch in overtime shootout, but still 2 regulation losses and we're almost at Christmas. I mean, so yeah, they're in a different league.
Also, one other random stat I'll just mention. Only 2 teams in the Atlantic Division have a goal differential above even right now. I don't know if you knew this. That's just a weird random stat I just wanted to throw out there. Yeah, the Leafs were actually above even until they went -10 on that 3-game road trip, and that dropped them to -9. But they actually they were above water entering that road trip. Yeah, super weird. But yeah, Ottawa and Tampa are those 2 teams. Anyway, we'll move away from the Atlantic Division. Well, actually, we can't, because I do want to get to a pair of moves that occurred before the roster freeze, before the start of the weekend, and it involves the Montreal Canadiens, because they reacquire Philip Danault from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for a second-round pick, which belonged to Columbus originally. I believe it was involved in the Patrick Laine, Jordan Harris trade. But yeah, Philip Danault returns to Montreal. What did you think of the trade? Very interesting deal. Danault wanted out of LA, did not go well there for him this year, and, managed to see that happen before the holiday break kicked in, which I'm sure is nice for him, and nowhere he'd rather end up than a place that's, he played previously and had a lot of success with the Canadiens. And, for Montreal's end of this deal, there's 2 main positives. One, they didn't have to go up a roster player. I think there was some discussions during the trade talks about them having to potentially surrender something off their roster, which, might have defeated the purpose in a sense, because they're obviously trying to bolster what they have. And so they get them for a 2nd-round pick. The second part of it is what it allows, the coaching staff to do. And, when you look at the Canadiens, because they are so top heavy with their first line, a lot is being asked of Nick Suzuki. And I think there'll still be a lot asked of him, of course, but, he handled all the tough defensive minutes and is also their most competent and complete offensive player at this point in time. And,
I think that there were certain games or certain matchups where they would get in, and it was a tough spot for the bench to be managed. And so getting Danault back, assuming he can play better than he did during this season in LA, where, as I mentioned, it didn't go well. He wasn't happy. I think it's reasonable to think that better surroundings for him, better headspace, could lead to play more like you've seen in the past. But, when he's been at his best, obviously been a very good matchup centerman, been capable, playing other teams' best. And so I think it might lighten the load somewhat for Suzuki and free him up. It's not as though he's slumping offensively. He's put up good numbers, but I think that there could be even more there, depending on how the usage goes. So, I like the deal for Danault personally, because he gets somewhere where he's happy, and he wasn't happy. And for the Canadians, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. The acquisition cost wasn't too steep, and I think better positions them to make another push for the playoffs and to be a tougher matchup team as they get towards the second half here. So that was a nice move for the Canadians, and I think the price again is one they can live with.
Yeah, I think the fact they didn't have to give up a roster player to reaccommodate Phillip Danault is a big win for them there. And one big knock on this Montreal Canadiens team to this point was the fact that maybe they could have used someone, or just having more players were just better defensively. People who remember him from the 2021 run understand that Phillip Danault knows how to play that role well. So I actually like that for their center depth. I can understand that some people might want another center of maybe slightly higher quality in that spot, but you at least get a guy who knows what it takes to play in that organization, knows what it takes to be a solid defensive center in this league. I like the trade for them. And yes, I think they still have their own second round pick too. The second rounder they gave up from Columbus. I mean, again, it belongs to Columbus, but I believe they still have their own as well.
And what I point out is this is not the last move of the season. Like, I still think the Canadians are very much going to be looking for another upgrade at center if they can find one. And you might get to a world where Danault's your third line center if they're able to make a trade. Now, those trades are not easy to come by. We know there's a lot of teams out there looking for centers. The usual caveats apply, but the point is this helps today, but this doesn't mean he's their forever number 2C. Another point I should make on Danault is he actually played well in Los Angeles after signing that contract. Was quite good in the playoffs. Had some Connor McDavid matchups over the years. Obviously, the Oilers seem to draw the Kings every year in the first round. But I think he fared well in a lot of those minutes. It's really only this season where you've seen a real dip, especially on the offensive side of the puck for Danault. Be just curious to see, get him back in the old colors, get him back in the environment, get him back on, a team that clearly is going to play him more. I think that he was getting in LA just because of the needs that the Canadians have, and it might be an opportunity for him to kind of relive old glories, we'll call it.
Let's get to the other trade that occurred before the weekend. Mason Marchment to Columbus for a pair of picks. Thoughts on that trade?
Well, the Blue Jackets were in one, right? They've really been scuffling, and I think, you kind of heard from some of the leaders on their team, even Zach Werenski expressing some frustration before this deal was done, just about the direction they're going. And so I really view this as a move where GM is trying to give his guys a little bit of a boost. And from Columbus's end of this deal, they get Mason Marchment now, but if they fall out of the race, he's a pending UFA. I think there's a world where they could flip him again by the deadline. And, there's also a world they could extend him. There's at least a preliminary conversation where, that idea was placed out there. I think everyone's just going to let things see how the relationship develops, how things fit. But, short term, they've added another potentially impactful player, a player that's going to be motivated, whether it's competing for a contract in Columbus or somewhere else. Mason Marchment is playing for his next deal, and, scored in his first game there for the Blue Jackets. So he showed some immediate dividends. Didn't fit well for him for whatever reason in Seattle after coming over from the Dallas Stars in the summertime, but, a fresh start for him. And I think, the Blue Jackets want to be in this playoff race. They really scuffled of late. And so Don Waddell at least gives the coaching staff another piece to play with, and gives the players kind of a sense of, I believe in you guys. Here's another piece. Let's go get this.
By the way, for those who are trying to remember all the names from CJ's trade board, Danault and Marchment are number 9 and number 10 on CJ's last trade board, which you can read at The Athletic. Anything else you're hearing on some of the other options still available on your board?
Not really. I mean, it's been quiet here the last few days since the deadline passed, but it was kind of cool to see 2 moves. Those moves both came within the last hour or two, give or take, of the holiday roster freeze kicking in. So, you know, I'm of the belief we're going to move towards like these little deadlines might prompt more movement around the league, and we saw it in that case, and you know, bodes well for perhaps the new year when I think there's going to be more action around the league.
For sure. I'm also obviously all the different options available on the board I'm going to look out for, but I'm particularly intrigued with Rasmus Andersson, who I really enjoyed his interview with Scott Oak and Eric Francis over the weekend. And when he was asked about his situation and the potential of possibly, if the option presents itself with staying in Calgary, he did say it does take 2 to tango. Very interesting personality, Rasmus Andersson. Maybe a little underrated because Calgary hasn't been good the last few years, but Rasmus Andersson, a very underrated personality in this league and very unique in how he's been reacting to some of the attention around him with his name being in trade rumors.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be a tough spot. I mean, I'm the source of some of this stuff, so like I'm not removing myself from it, but you know, I can appreciate from the human end, you know, must be weird seeing yourself kind of at the top of these boards and, you know, in these updates on our insider segments routinely and have so much interest in you. I mean, it is part of the gig. And, you know, I think the way I read his comment that he made on After Hours is, you know, I think he's a little unsure to what degree Calgary wants to keep him. You know, I do think the Flames would have interest in keeping Rasmus Andersson, but it's only at a certain price point, right? And it might be only a certain number of years. And he would have to decide if it's most important for him to stay there in that case, or if he wants to maybe maximize his earnings, he might have to go somewhere else. I mean, I think that's part of the tango that's gone on. You know, I remember hearing in the fall, you know, he was open to an 8-year extension if the Flames were going to do that. I don't know if they want to go that far. For example, you know, they would be the only team right now that could sign him to an 8-year deal with the way the CBA works. So, you know, we'll see how that plays out. I think certainly Calgary as a team, when we get back on the other side of the freeze, you know, there's going to be more focus on whether it's him or Blake Coleman, Nazem Kadri, you know, all the guys on the board. You know, did they rebuild it a little? Did they reset it by moving those players, or, you know, could they even extend Rasmus Andersson? I mean, crazier things have happened. And I'm with you. I thought the interview was excellent. I thought he handled it all very well, and, you know, basically said he doesn't listen to anything, and you know, I find that a little hard to believe. It's probably hard to ignore everything. Even if you are personally doing that, I mean, everyone's got friends or buddies, or, you know, we all put our words down to a little tweet. It's easy to flip someone a tweet. So,
the aggregators, all those guys, it all just, it's all in the cycle. He
seemed to leave the door open though to staying in Calgary. That was my read, but we'll see if he in the organization can find anything close to the same vision on what he should be paid to do so.
All right. Great work as always, CJ. Normally we would do Ask CJ at the end of our Monday episode. However, we are going to do an entire episode later this week dedicated to your questions. Thank you to everyone who sent those in, whether on X or over Discord. We really appreciate you. And we wish you all a happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Be safe out there. CJ, that goes for you too, buddy. Love you, man.
Same to you, buddy. Do you got any big plans downtime. Or what? What's the lowdown?
Just gonna try to be off grid. Just gonna try to just be chill. Just take advantage of a little bit of some downtime, because I know the start of 2026 is gonna ramp up and I'll be pretty busy. So I want to just take a couple days just to recharge, so that way I'll be at full force. Hopefully you're able to take some time off and not be on your phone the whole time. Yeah, no, I mean, it's nice that if the holiday roster freeze is good for one thing, it's you know, I know there can't be a trade right now, and same goes for the next, you know, 4, 5, 6 days. So, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to some family time, getting out on the skates. Yeah, I mean, just look, I love what we do. So I'm not taking a break from anything, because this is a great life we live. But yeah, all the best to you and your family, pal. Same to all our listeners out there, and just be safe. Enjoy the World Juniors too.
That's going to be
enjoy the World Juniors.
I'm getting excited for that tournament, man.
Yeah, I want to see if Canada can redeem themselves after last year. That would be. I'm intrigued for that scenario.
What was the line? I wish I remember the player's name, but he said they're going there to like steal the dreams or something. Ooh. There was a really good quote. I should have come a little better prepared, but yeah, they're there to like break hearts and steal dreams or something.
I wonder, like, just guess. I'm purely guessing here, and it's totally cool if like I get it wrong. That sounds like something either like Zane Parekh or like Gavin McKenna would say.
Yeah, I don't think it was either of them, but it was giving me, the quote was giving me flashbacks to all those years ago, the PK Subban quote going to Boston. And, you know, I want to feel all the energy and the noise and I want to take that away from them kind of thing. Like that, it was giving some of those notes. So I'll put it that way when I heard it said. Yeah,
that quote is so badass.
Well, especially because he backed it up. I mean, it's one thing to say it. He backed it up. They went and won Game 7 in Boston.
Yeah, we could do an entire episode reliving that entire playoff run, but we have holiday times to get to. So thank you, everyone who tapped in for today's edition of The Chris Johnston Show. We will see you all later this week. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.